Welcome to Say More from Boston Globe Opinion. I'm Shirley Leung. I'm in the studio this week with Globe reporter Chris Sears, who just released a reporting project on gambling in Massachusetts. Chris and a team of reporters looked at how casinos target Asian communities with their marketing, kind of like how Big Tobacco pushed another addictive product, menthol cigarettes, onto Black customers. The Globe team also explored how illegal gambling dens are flourishing in Chinatown and how the Boston Police, the Suffolk District Attorney, and Boston Mayor Michelle Wu have all looked the other way. Welcome to the studio, Chris.
Thank you, Shirley. I appreciate it.
So, Chris, this reporting project started with some simple observations. I mean, you saw a shuttle bus. So tell me what you saw and what questions you had.
Sure. So it was about a year ago. I just was spending time in Boston's Chinatown neighborhood and noticed these shuttles with the big Encore logo, across the windows, and noticed that these shuttles were packed to the gills. And that just had me wondering, well, why are these shuttle buses coming to this neighborhood? And I just started riding the shuttles, and talking to folks that were going to Encore. And then I learned that there were other shuttle routes and that they were going through other neighborhoods around Greater Boston with high concentrations of Asian residents. And so I started riding those shuttles.
Probably like Quincy, right?
Like Quincy, Malden. Dorchester. You could draw a map, and we actually did that, which shows the route and how it goes directly through specific Asian neighborhoods and skips over, neighborhoods like the one where I live in Medford.
So, Chris, you don't speak Chinese, right?
I don't.
Most people spoke English, or is English as a second language, or how did you?
No. In fact, that became a barrier. I want to say several months into it, spending time on the shuttles, as well as spending time in the casinos, I said, look, we need to have some help here. We need to have someone working on this who actually speaks Chinese, who knows Cantonese, who knows Mandarin. And so that's when Mabel Chan got on board. And she's terrific. She's done work for the New York Times. And she was just fantastic in terms of, building relationships with people and talking to people, and especially people that were struggling with gambling disorders, pretty severe ones.
So you and I talked a little bit about this. I mean, Asians, like to gamble. It's kind of not new, right? But what I appreciate about your series is that you uncovered that these casinos disproportionately targeted Asians, right? And they, and you found that a lot of Asian customers were more likely to be in serious debt as a result of going to these casinos. And so what else what other surprising things did you find, in this series?
I guess one thing that really struck me was, we went through thousands of pages of lawsuits that have been filed against casino patrons. And these were lawsuits against people that had gotten deeply in debt. And I was really struck at the amount of the lavish amount of credit lines that they had been given, in some cases over $300,000. And I was also struck by the high percentage of those borrowers who were being sued who happened to be of Asian descent. I think in Encore's case, more than 80% of those that they were suing were people of Asian descent. And so, yeah, you could start to see the connection between, the way they were being targeted through the shuttles and the billboards and the freebies that were being offered at the casinos and the credit lines, but also the damaging effects where the casinos were using these hardball tactics to go after them, suing them, in some cases getting judges to issue arrest warrants for them to collect on those debts. So that was one, I think really alarming finding from the legal documents. The other was that, there's illegal activity happening in the plain of day within the casinos. Mabel and I were, we made many trips to the casinos, and we witnessed that there were loan sharks that were circling, the Asian card games and, ducking into restrooms outside of the surveillance systems to give people chips, so they could they could continue gambling. And we learned from others that know some of these loan sharks that some of the interest rates on some of those loans are just exceedingly high, and all of it's illegal. So I was really struck that all of this activity that we could witness was being allowed to happen by our regulators.
One of the people you focused on in the series, Kim Jong-ma, right? And can you tell me where you met him and what happened to him?
Sure. So Kim Jong-ma is someone we came to know really well, really a gentle human being. He came from Hong Kong, an immigrant, and we met him at a mahjong party in Quincy. And he was sitting in the corner. I still remember this vividly. He was sitting by himself in the corner while other people were playing mahjong. And surely you probably had played.
Yes, I
So
played, I played a lot of mahjong. Yeah.
It's very loud. There's
yes.
the clacking of
tiles. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of activity.
Yeah.
And I was really struck at this older gentleman that was in the corner. And so approached him and we started talking. And he revealed to me that he didn't want to be there. Where he really wanted to be was at a casino. And he couldn't go to a casino because he had no money left. And he just seemed really sad and despondent. He started to talk about, how he had thoughts of suicide. And that began this journey where we started to spend more time with him and better understand his situation. Tragically, during the time in which we had, come to know Kim Jong-ma, he had resumed his gambling. And it got so bad that his partner that he loved ended up leaving him. And so we kind of witnessed this whole tragic rupturing of the love of his life happen kind of during real time as we were reporting on this. But Kim Jong-ma really stood out as somebody that I found as a really sympathetic figure. He had issues with loneliness. He was cut off from much of his support network. He was isolated from his family members. And we found that to be some of the recurring themes or underlying factors behind why so many people get caught in this vicious cycle of gambling. And
he had worked in the restaurant industry and basically retired, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why, and then, I guess in retirement, I guess he gambled away all his money.
That's right. Yeah.
And I guess, and because he's lonely, right? And he's just maybe bored.
I mean, that's a big factor behind this. Like, here's the thing, I really don't think that there's any reason to believe that Asians have more of a predisposition towards gambling than anyone else. I happen to be of Italian descent. A lot of my relatives gambled. I do think that there's some truth to the idea that, gambling fills a void for some people if they're cut off from social networks, especially if they're new to this country. And I think that's, the case with many people in these neighborhoods. And I think the casinos know that. And that's why they're specifically sending those shuttles and putting those billboards in those neighborhoods.
And I mean, you and I have talked about this series before it ran about, where is that line? I mean, Asians like to gamble. You found out Italians like to gamble.
Yes.
But like, where's that fine line where you're giving customers what they want, but and then maybe you're exploiting them for profit. And so can you talk about the range of opinions you encountered talking to people about this series? Like,
Sure.
Where is it? Is it just fun? And where is it exploitation?
Right. I mean, that's a great question. And I don't think we ever really untangled it entirely, right? I mean, we did talk to casino executives who were quite open about the idea that it's good business to target these communities because, quite frankly, one of the executives just came right out and said, Asians love to gamble, and we send shuttles to those communities for a reason.
Giving them what they want, right?
Right. We're giving them what they want, and they're popular. That was one thing they kept saying. It's popular. The shuttles are used frequently, so that is evidence enough that this is justified. And as you said, we're giving people what they want. At the same time, we have to acknowledge, that this is an addictive product and has major public health implications. I like the fact that you mentioned menthol cigarettes at the beginning of this, because, the parallel there is really strong between what was happening in the 1980s and previous with the big tobacco targeting Black neighborhoods with billboards for menthol cigarettes, and extremely addictive, extremely dangerous, and gambling, which is also has major public health implications. I just think a lot of that is missed, when we talk about gambling and casinos and online betting and everything else, because we're so caught up in, I don't know what, the glamour of it. I don't know.
Right. Well, yeah, it's exciting, right? Some of the
Right.
in your in your own series, why did people go to the casinos? It felt important, right?
Look, it is kind of exciting. Just on that note, I mean, I remember starting, the Lunar New Year in Chinatown, and Chinatown can be, it's a tight-knit neighborhood, as you know, and it can be a little rough. And getting on that shuttle and coming to Encore, and there they were, shooting off fireworks, and there were the lion dancers, and they were handing out hundreds of these envelopes with $2 bills in them, and they were hanging them on the plants in the casino, and children were taking them. And it just occurred to me, like, where else are these folks going to get this kind of experience, right? And there's something to be said for, like, there's the daily grind, let's face it, of working and living in that neighborhood. And then you come to Encore and you're being given, red envelopes with $2 bills, and there's a celebration around you. Of course it's going to look glamorous. I mean, it's exciting. So I see the attraction.
More of my conversation with Chris Sears after a short break. So, Chris, you've been on this addiction beat. You cover everything from the opioid crisis to now gambling. So maybe you could talk about this addiction science. I mean, as it relates to gambling. I mean, how is it? Is it really similar to how people get addicted to opioids? I mean, how does gambling become addictive?
Sure. I mean, it's absolutely analogous. Gambling plays on the same receptors in the brain that activate the reward system in the same way that opioids do, that alcohol does, that pretty much any addictive product does. So I don't view it as its own separate category. Just because it's a behavioral addiction as opposed to a substance use addiction doesn't make it in any way less harmful. It's part of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the DSM, which is the Bible of mental health disorders. And it's there for a reason. It's there because gambling disorders are, correlated with all kinds of serious health effects, from, high anxiety to chronic stress to high blood pressure to depression and suicide. There have been studies that have shown that people with gambling disorders have 5 to 10 times higher rates of suicide as the overall population, and that its correlation with suicide is higher than any other type of addiction. So, I mean, it's a serious public health issue. So I'm not saying I'm against gambling, because I'm not. I view it as a public health issue, and that's the prism in which I look at it. And so when I see those shuttles going specifically through Asian neighborhoods, that raises alarm bells for me, and it should for everybody else.
And I was surprised to read in your stories that Massachusetts spends more per capita than any other state on helping people with their gambling problems. And maybe you could talk about what kind of things, what is it spent on, and why, and do they spend, it seems like they should be spending more of it on the Asian community if there are a lot of us gambling, right? And with addictive gambling issues.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to put that, statistic in context, right? We may spend more per capita than any other state, but I don't think that's saying a lot. We're still spending, just a very small fraction of the overall amount of money that's being brought in through casino gambling, which is something on the order of $2.6 billion. And only a tiny, tiny percentage of that, less than 1% actually flows to Asian community groups that are working to mitigate the effects. And up until 2019, there was not a single dollar spent to help specifically that went to Asian community groups to help address the problem in those
Wow.
communities. So we're
Even though
still
a lot of there's a disproportionate amount of Asians gambling, right?
right. The casinos have indicated that up to a quarter of their customers are of Asian descent, and there have been surveys that suggest that's the case. Yet
Mm,
that's about 3 times their share of the population in our state,
mm,
and so you would think that this would be more of a focus. And it's not a new problem, as you know. This has been an issue for ever since Foxwoods and Mohegan Sun in Connecticut were sending shuttles to Boston's Chinatown neighborhood 20 years ago. And, in 2021, there was a big study that came out known as the Asian Cares Report, which laid out the problem and called for tighter regulation and called on the Mass Gaming Commission to actually fund investigations into whether the shuttle buses were ethical and whether the marketing practices were predatory. And here we are 5 years later, none of that has happened.
hmm
And the recommendations have been ignored. But we're starting to hear more and more from community members that they're just taking matters into their own hands. They're not going to wait for state regulators. They're going to address it and build resilience in their own communities.
hmm I mean, sometimes the money I think is spent on, the TV ads, right? They do advertising, and aren't there people? Is it called Game Sense? Right?
Right.
They're walking through the casinos trying to look for people who might be struggling with a gambling addiction. But how else is where does this money go to? What is it? What do they do with it?
Well, one of the struggles I hear from public health experts is that a lot of the money that's being spent to address gambling addiction is going towards ideas and programs that aren't really evidence-based. I mean, it may
Mm,
look good to see a problem gambling billboard at a
right.
T-stop. It may look good that there's a gambling helpline, and there should be. Um, and it may look good that there are these game sense agents walking the casino floors with green shirts, but like, what's the evidence that those
Mm,
actually work? I mean, I asked the state repeatedly for any evidence that game sense, which costs the state over $3 million a year, actually on a statewide level has helped to reduce problem gambling, and they couldn't come up with any.
mm,
And so I just think that there's a whole body of thought that this money would be better spent if it went directly to the communities that are being targeted and are being harmed. There are incredible community organizations, the Boston Chinatown Neighborhood Center and others that are doing great work on this topic. And there's a whole argument that instead of putting all this money towards flashy billboards and whatnot, give it directly to the people to address the problem in their communities so that there are people that can help them. There are clinicians in their communities who speak their language, that speak Mandarin and Cantonese, who can help them. Because that was one thing I kept hearing over and over again, which was, I have a loved one, I have a parent, I have a brother, I have a sister who has a gambling problem, and we can't find anyone who can help them who actually speak their language. So we, as a state, need to grow the ranks of folks who can help people in their communities and who speak their language.
So, Chris, if money were given directly to more Asian community groups to address problem gambling, like what would they do with the money?
Wow. Those groups I think would be able to come up with some creative solutions. I mean, some already have. There's an organization out of Quincy, the Civic Education Alliance, that has started to organize these community events closer to home so people don't get
Mm.
on the shuttles,
Like the mahjong
like
clubs.
the Mahjong gatherings, which are great. I don't want to speak for these community organizations, but some of them have talked about how they could use that money to hire more clinicians, more mental health counselors who could address some of the underlying
Mm.
issues in their communities and move upstream from the problem. But I think there's, very creative, dynamic people who understand the problem specifically within their communities that could address it in a way that might be better than, people on Beacon Hill.
So what has been the reaction to your series?
I mean, I got to say that the initial reaction from community groups within the Asian communities was overwhelmingly positive. I think there was a lot of frustration that, their story had not been fully told. So they appreciated that. There's been some talk of, calling on the State Gaming Commission to actually follow through on some of the recommendations that were made 5 years ago, to look into these marketing practices. And the shuttle City Councilor Ed Flynn filed a resolution for a city council hearing specifically on the marketing practices and the prevalence of gambling in Chinatown, including the issue of the underground dens, which we haven't really talked as much about, but which are prevalent. We counted at least 30 to 40 of these illegal dens in the Chinatown neighborhood. So the important thing is that I think is for the conversation just to keep going. And I appreciate the fact that you're willing to, continue it.
Chris, was a great series. I know I've heard a lot from the Chinese community about it and Chinese leaders. And so it's, I hope the Globe stays on it. I hope you stay on it.
Really appreciate it. We will. Thank you.
Chris Sears is the Globe's addiction reporter. There is a link to his series, A Losing Bet, in the show notes. The series is also available in Chinese. Thanks, Chris, for coming in.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Say More is a production of the Boston Globe. Today's episode was produced by Anna Kusmer. Our editor is Jim Dow. Our engineer is Uzair Ahmed. If you like the show, please follow us and leave a review. You can email us at saymore@globe.com. I'm Shirley Leung. Thanks for listening.